Hello and good day to you. This is Tracy Harrison from the School of Applied Functional Medicine. I have a special message today for our practitioner community. In order to be of service to all of you out there, the rich diversity of healthcare practitioners worldwide, trying to be of best service that you possibly can to the people in your communities, in the active, I was going to say the wake, but in the environment, in the current state of this pandemic. I actually want to start off today's broadcast with a very sincere and heartfelt word of gratitude. I would love for, as you're chiming on here, share your name, where you're coming to us from, what kind of practitioner you are. How are you engaged with this pandemic? Some of you are on the front line of emergency care and triage right now, which is a very vulnerable and critically important place to be. Lives are being saved through acute and emergency medicine engagement. Others of you are active in the primary care vein, doing the best you can to engage with frightened, concerned people who feel very vulnerable and are looking for your support, your reassurance. They're looking for clarity on, are they themselves, do they have this dreaded diagnosis? Are their children at risk? Is their mother at risk? Is their best friend or their spouse who has an autoimmune diagnosis or some other immunodeficiency? Are they ill? Are they at risk? How bad could this get? How dangerous could this be? Am I going to survive? And even talking about it here to you, you can feel my sympathetic nervous system kick in, right? We stop breathing from our belly. We start breathing more and more short and more short. And we start breathing very shallowly and frequently and further activating our sympathetic dominant nervous system mode with frequent inhalation and very short, frequent exhalation. Some of you are out there in the world of preventative medicine or engaging with people more on chronic lifestyle-mediated disease, and a lot of your population is more vulnerable to actually developing COVID-19 as a result of SARS-CoV-2. I think that's the latest label for the current coronavirus pandemic. And you are trying to help these people to prepare their bodies to prevent either an infection or the downstream actual disease process from acquiring this virus. Others of you are in healthcare education, and you're doing a critical role with regard to separating the myth and the fear and the politics and the theories and the statistics. You're trying to separate all of that negative, fear-mongering, fear-promoting from some much less sexy, maybe much less stimulating truths, right? Actions, steps that people can actually take, things that can actually be preventive. And I just want to honor all of you. I appreciate that we're going to have a huge audience today. We're going to have people who are serving individuals across this entire spectrum. And I'm going to do the best I can today to offer the best of what we have gleaned here at the School of Applied Functional Medicine over the past few weeks in terms of priorities and information that I believe can best support you as practitioners, understanding that you're a very diverse global audience. And so in that sense, if you will hang in there with me, please, and be patient for the entire message today. Some of what I'm going to say is more appropriate for those of you on the front line, in the swamp, right there, helping those who are struggling with acute disease promotion from this pandemic. Others are, again, more in the middle of the road, or others are in the prevention. But as I said in the beginning, the primary thing I want to say to all of you is thank you. And I really do want to start by just inviting all of us to take a deep breath, just for a moment. I know I need it, but I imagine all of us could need it. You are all in deep service, and what you do is blessed and divine and critically important, And I get it that right now you are misunderstood. In some cases, you're being vilified as part of the problem, which is a travesty. You're overwhelmed. You yourself are vulnerable. You're likely worried about how do I provide greatest service to my communities, but keep my own immune system strong, still protect my family. I see you. I get that. It's a delicate balance. And there are a lot of positive and proactive and successful ways that this can happen. There's no one right answer. And I really want to encourage all of us to just land here with compassion for one another, for the different ways in which we're serving our really crucial, vulnerable populations in this pandemic. And let's just pause for a minute for a deep breath, right? You're welcome to close your eyes if you wish. Relax your muscles, relax the buttocks, right? Your sphincter muscles. Land in whatever chair you're sitting in. Relax your shoulders, pull them back. Relax your hands on your legs or on a counter. And just take a deep breath all the way down into your belly. Let it out. Take another deep one and slowly exhale it. Remember that it is the slow exhalation that in particular allows the nervous system to begin to make the switch progressively from a sympathetic dominant mode to a parasympathetic dominant mode. Our nervous system and our immune system are on stage together as a dynamic duo in these tumultuous times. And we are in sympathetic dominant nervous system mode largely because this is why humans are here having this discussion today, because we are survivors. And we have an incredibly strong ability to survive crisis, to survive things that can threaten our very existence. And through the functional medicine lens, we know that survival is critically important, right? When we need to run for our lives, when we need to fight or flight or hide, sympathetic nervous system mode allows us to run, to lift, to persevere, to sustain incredible hypervigilance to stay alive. This is a very important service. It's a wonderful thing. It's a blessing. But we also know through the functional medicine lens that sustained activation of the sympathetic dominant nervous system mode and all the things that come along with it, high cortisol, frequent surges of epinephrine and norepinephrine in order to raise blood sugar, raise blood pressure, keep our eyes more responsive. We don't miss things that are happening in the visual environment. We hear more intently. We are on high alert. But we also know during those times that it is very challenging for our immune system to fight infection. The body naturally chooses to prioritize various muscle contractions, various glandular secretions, various neural transmission, right, throughout our, not just our brain and central nervous system, but our enteric nervous system, our peripheral nervous system, in order to promote certain functions. The body cannot do everything all at once at full capability. We have survived and have thrived over our entire human history because of our ability to be in a sympathetic survival mode when necessary, and then to switch into a parasympathetic, rest, digest, heal, and recover from infection when needed. And yes, we need to be able to do both. But when we remain in a sustained sympathetic dominant nervous system mode, we are not going to be at our strongest immune function. This is not a hocus pocus concept. It's not an airy-fairy holistic medicine concept. This has been well demonstrated through long-standing study. We know that sustained chronic stress, right? And chronic doesn't mean 50 years, right? Chronic means for many hours or all wakening hours of a day for multiple days in a row. At this point, we're well into multiple weeks. We're getting to the point of a month plus in some other countries around the world outside of the US here. I respect immensely. You're 2+ months into this. This is chronic stress, and it is causing pervasive, widespread immunosuppression that, knowingly or not, we are causing through lifestyle choices that are keeping us in a sympathetic dominant nervous system mode. And I'm going to jump around today and talk about a lot of different concepts, a lot of different concerns and considerations that you may want to act on for your communities and your practice, for your professional colleagues. But I'm also talking to you as human beings. You as devoted, intelligent, caring, but also vulnerable human beings who are at the forefront of this battle, this journey, this transformation, right? I'm not going to talk about the war against the virus, right? Because we're going to be transformed as humans have always been, as nature has always been, as a result of this challenge. And every challenge transforms us as a species. And we arise on the other side at a higher level of evolution, a capability of resiliency. And so this virus is going to have its way with us. We are in a pandemic. There are facts at play right now. However, we do have some choices about how we respond. And I'm going to talk a lot today about the difference between responding and reacting, right? The people around us are doing a lot of reacting. You in particular as healthcare providers are vulnerable to a very intense, acute environment of reacting, right? More risk, more threats, fewer personal protective equipment, scarier stats, people acting out. I totally honor the facts. I completely understand the environment in which we are in and the environment that we are being asked to do our best to show up. And you are all heroes, right? I really hope you just breathe that in. You're all heroes in the way in which you are serving the populations in your communities around you today. And so it's critical. I'm going to give you information to take care of them. But going back to what I was saying, I today want to be the person in particular who takes a stand for you as an individual who is showing up to serve this pandemic. But we need you to take care of you. Because if you succumb to illness on the other side of this virus, we want you to recover quickly. But we want as much as possible for healthcare providers to stay safe from this. And so, yes, we want you to serve all of these people. But as always, we best serve anyone else in any way when our own cup overflows. So I really want to inspire and appeal to all of you to take care of yourself, to make space. And I get it, there's not a lot of space right now, and you're all being called in for extra hours, extra shift, extra focus. Your heart is being pulled in so many different directions. But to make space, to care for you so that your cup can overflow from a place of wellness and groundedness so that you have more to give to the people who really need you. We obviously have a pandemic, right, of coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2 and the COVID-19 that can result downstream from it. And I also think increasingly other secondary infections that are happening as a result of the acute inflammation and immunosuppression that can result from COVID-19, right? We've got a lot of people struggling with other viral load and secondary bacterial infections as a result of COVID-19. But in addition to this particular viral epidemic, we also have a virus of fear. We have a virus of fear. And I'm going to talk about a lot of concepts today, but starting with the notion of what is the highest leverage thing that I believe we can all do And again, acknowledging that some of you are on the front lines, some of you are in the middle with trying to segregate the acute from the worried, from the well and prevention. And then some of you are dealing with different aspects of healthcare through the functional or integrative lens. I believe the thing that our communities most need from us is leadership. And I'm going to distinguish leadership from fear, because I believe the best balm for fear is leadership. People don't need any help with more fear. You can tune into anything, whether it's the internet or the radio or texting or any social media site or news sites or, oh my God, we're drowning in more fear-promoting information resources, whether it's about statistics or the current infectious rates or how many new cases there are or how many new deaths they are, or the politics or the blaming, or the governments aren't acting fast enough, or governments are acting too fast and we're causing economic havoc, and people are going to survive the virus, but they're going to not be able to afford food. And there's blaming and complaining and criticizing, and people are closing down. People are closing down into sympathetic lockdown as a result of the virus of fear. And fear is a very uncomfortable emotion, right? We, in today's day and age, especially here in the US, where we're talking about all the time about freedom and empowerment and action, and I'm going to do what I want to do, and it's an independent world. And this pandemic is perhaps calling on all of us in one of the most dramatic examples that I have experienced in my particular life, of we have got to get comfortable with there being a backdrop of fear. I don't think we're going to get out from under that. I think we've got to acknowledge people's fear, and that fear makes people feel vulnerable, and more vulnerability makes people feel more fear. And that is a reality right now, and it can be a vicious cycle. What I believe is particularly toxic to our communities is that vulnerability that promotes more fear in an effort to get some kind of relief is causing a lot of people to go into serious control mode. And when they can't control the behavior of others, this is leading to all sorts of lashing out and fear-mongering and doomsday theorizing, and people taking hypotheses and running with them as extreme communications, and again closing down in criticism. And this is a time when more than ever we need communities fostered by leaders. And if you don't see yourself as a leader and a hero, I'm going to change your identity today, folks, because you are a leader. And whether you rise to that or not is up to you. No judgment from me. It's a tough environment out there. But you have a very precious and critical opportunity to be a leader to help foster communities. And while people are criticizing and complaining and controlling and all these other negative fear-mongering C words and closing down in the ultimate example of hide, protect, lock down, we have to, as leaders, seize the opportunity to communicate the importance of physically isolating from one another so that we can slow the transmission of this virus, which I do think is going to have its way with us because it's a novel virus. We don't have a strong adaptive immune system that eventually we will undoubtedly have that can help us to have a more upfront response to it. But right now, our innate immune systems are trying to figure out what the hell is going on. It's going to take time, and this first wave of this virus is going to have its way with us, and we need to isolate physically so that the vulnerable individuals in our population, and we're learning that the definition of vulnerable is much broader than we thought it was initially, but so we don't overload our healthcare systems and more people die because too many people get sick at the same time and we don't have the healthcare resources to support them. Okay? You've seen it before in some various things online, whether it's you talking about it or you sharing someone else talking about it. We've got to minimize a spike peak of this particular disease, right? The downstream disease manifestation, right? The acute respiratory disease that can happen as a result of this coronavirus. We've got to mash down the peak so that we can manage it as a healthcare community and try to save lives. Because we already know that this coronavirus is extremely infectious, right? Many of us are going to get it, right? But if we do the best we can as a collective community to help with educating people, inspiring them, empowering them to take action to boost their immune function, even if we get the virus, right? If there is an actual transmission, we will not struggle with the downstream disease. And people need to know that these are two different things, right? I've been using the analogy, a lot of things people can relate to, even young people. And we've got to get to the young people because people who, I get it, you know, when I was a teenager or in my 20s, I felt omnipotent and omniscient and invulnerable as well, right? But there are key sects of our population, especially individuals between the age of about 10 and 20 something, who need to understand that the likelihood of them coming down with acute disease from this virus is very small. But they have basically weapons in their hands via which they can wreak havoc and damage on their community members, or they can choose to separate themselves in order to not promote that. And that is a measure of effect. It's a measure of control that these individuals do have, that we as leaders need to be reaching out to them and not trying to motivate them with fear, which just tends to make them shut down and not listen and run and go party and ignore you and exert their individualism and their freedom. We've got to inspire them with their opportunity to be a hero. Our teenagers, our 20-somethings, our college students. My goodness, we talk so much about the millennials and the young people and how they're not doing the right thing. And there's all sorts of criticism that they pick up in our community today. They're different. They use technology in a different way. They have different social behaviors and so much criticism. Folks, we've got to use our leadership, our influence, our reach, our particular avenue of inspiring these young people to be heroes. Stop making people afraid. Start inspiring people with the very real opportunity to be heroes. We would much prefer to be heroes than to be fear-mongered into being smaller and smaller and more hidden and more controlling and lashing out. We've got to be educating, inspiring, and empowering. And young people in particular, because they feel invulnerable, because they feel, I'm not going to get that. It's spring break. The hell, I'm staying at home. I'm going to go party. I'm not going to get sick. Well, here is your opportunity, young people, right? You are the future. But your behavior is going to determine a great deal what happens in the next 4 to 6 weeks on whether or not we can control the aggressiveness and the spike of this first wave of this virus, this novel virus, and the people who are not invulnerable, who are really quite vulnerable to this in terms of developing downstream debilitating disease, who will need likely acute or emergency healthcare intervention if it gets worse. And we have the staff we have the hospital beds we have. Sure, we can plan differently for the future. We can have long debates a while from now about what we should have done around testing, what we should have done around supply management, what we should have done about personal protective equipment policy in a given hospital or in a given clinic. We're going to talk all about that, folks. Right now is not the time to talk about it because we got what we've got. And there's only so much we can manufacture or transport or make available. Right now, we've got what we've got, and we need to be leaders, to be out in our communities, inspiring people to use the tools we have to minimize the devastating hit of this virus and the downstream disease that it promotes in order to save lives. And so I want to try and inspire all of you to use whatever voice you have, whatever avenue, whatever platform, whatever media suits you, to move forward and try to inspire people to take action. So my first inspiration is to you, because you are the change. You are the beginning. right? And you have communities that you can influence, that you can use positive messages, positive opportunities to be a hero in order to inspire action. But we've got all collectively to be visible with recommendations that people can actually follow through on. Not just more fear mongering, not just more stats that can cause people to stay in sympathetic dominant nervous system mode, freaking out, living and breathing by the TV and all the different media spaces and lowering their own immune function so that whatever exposure and vulnerability they do have, they're more likely to become sick. They're more likely to need to go out and about and therefore risk exposing others and being a part of the cycle. So your leadership is hugely needed to, first of all, counter the virus of fear, right, with the antiviral of inspiration. We need heroes. We don't need more stats and fear mongering, folks. There's plenty of data out there, right? And I love data as the next person, but data right now, other than what might be helping with acute management on the emergency medicine lines, and I totally respect that, and the necessity of stats in terms of prioritization in order to share resources for triage. I completely respect that. But outside of that particular piece, the rest of us, the rest of the world are not benefiting for more clarity on just how bad this is. It's not helping anybody's immune system to be stronger. And from what I've seen so far, fear only goes so far to motivating people to take action to help save themselves and to help also minimize the risk to other people, right? The fear hose of influence is empty, is dribbling. There's going to be no more impact from that. We've got to switch to a voice of positive inspiration and the need and the opportunity for people who may feel marginalized and just vulnerable in this whole epidemic, to inspire them that they can be heroes. So I'm going to take a drink of water here. While I'm pausing for a second, please share this broadcast. People in your communities, the colleagues that you have in the healthcare communities, I want to share this message with them. People in your communities who lead organizations, whether it's a company or a family or a community organization or some other type of group of people, some population. I really want to share this information with them so that they too, hopefully, can take the inspiration in whatever way resonates with them and also make a difference. Okay, so let's see. I really want to talk. I'm going to shift gears now from the topic of leadership. If you have to leave now, that's the number one message I want to deliver. But in terms of actions that we all need to take, and actions that those of us who aren't in the trenches every day doing patient care, right? Where we have space and we can engage with telemedicine and webinars and other Facebook Lives and podcasts and all of these things. We need to be present out there and delivering in positive, affirming, uplifting ways the necessity of the following actions. I really believe strongly that we must be physically isolating from one another. What we are learning is that this particular virus, again, it's a novel virus, right? So our immune system is just learning how to respond to this, right? It only has a little bit of similarity even to prior SARS viruses. And so we're going to have to learn how to do this, and it's going to take time, and we're going to be wrestling in this virus with this virus in waves. And typically it's the first wave, right, that is most virulent and also most deadly because it will adapt, right? It will evolve, right? Viruses want to survive, want to replicate, right? It's different, right? Viral replication, viral transmission is different from a bacteria. And so they will evolve, and our immune system will become informed and will adapt to it, and we will have increasing mechanisms. And of course, what we're learning is that this virus is particularly adaptive, and it is shifting, and we're getting different forms of it, right? So even more important for us to isolate physically. There are some communities that have already gone into significant lockdown. There's a lot of discussion about shelter in place. Some communities are doing this. Different countries around the world are doing this. In many cases, governments are having to take action with understandably dramatic financial implications. Absolutely, that is a fact of where we are today. But having the government take dramatic financial impact choices while people are still running around getting together to talk about all the dangers that are going on and still not taking seriously the message is like two negatives, right? We've got to get out the message about social distancing. I think that term is too light. Get away from each other, folks. We've got to get clearer and crisper with this message. Again, not in the vein of fear, but in the vein of being a hero, right? We've got to get distant. And absolutely, folks are in this notion of, well, as long as you don't sneeze on me or cough on me, I'm not vulnerable. But what we know is we touch our face all the time. You touch a surface, you touch a doorknob, or you touch a keypad at a grocery store, and I come in right behind you and I'm wearing a mask, right? But I'm touching that same keypad. I'm putting my hand on that same piece of metal, right? We've got to be careful that when we're talking about, liquid droplet transmission, yes, this is about you don't want anyone to cough or sneeze on you, but right, we touch our face all the time. And oh, by the way, if you're coughing and sneezing, what are you doing? You're touching your face constantly. You're picking your nose, you're blowing your nose, you're clearing your throat, you're wiping your mouth, right? And we're touching things, we're touching stuff all over the place, right? And so people are getting transmission from surfaces, right? And sure, we need to be focusing on cleaning surfaces, right? I think the current antiviral recommendations is at least 60% alcohol, right? So certainly the typical healthcare grade cleaners are highly appropriate. We need to be washing our hands and do the surgical hand wash, folks. Most of you were taught this in school, right? Sing the happy birthday song twice. Soap up with warm water and really truly get a lot of soap. None of this fingertip washing, right? Whole hands, scrub underneath your nails, do the wrist rub, right? Happy birthday twice, right? Get them thoroughly clean, right? We're running out of hand sanitizer. We got to go back to using soap. If you are in an essential function of some kind, if it's outside of healthcare, you got to be attentive to wiping off surfaces and finding some way to stop touching your face, right? You can put a reminder on your phone, right? There's all sorts of tips and guides that we can use in order to do this, right? But we've got to start doing these kinds of things. And absolutely, right, Nadine? Because these kinds of things promote more fear, it can be so relaxing and so much more calming to just encourage people to stay home. Just encourage people to stay home, right? And not have a whole bunch of friends come over and have a party, right? But just encourage people to stay home, right? What we know that this is a moisture, right, transmitted virus. People's breath is moist. If they are sick, right, there's a lot more likely to be moisture transmission. Is there an exact science on how close do people have to be before you breathe on them? Again, I would rather us get in this space of being proactive and being truly cautious, right? Not controlling, but cautious in terms of keeping some space. But I want to balance this message of distancing and separation and just stay home, right? With the other side of the coin, right? It's the glass half empty. Well, now let's talk about the glass half full. When we stay home, we have an opportunity to engage in an unprecedented way in this current generation with our families during daytime, weekday time, right? And I appreciate not everybody can be at home, not everybody can work from home, but many people can. And so I want to speak for a moment to those individuals. So many of us have wished for more time to get a project done, more time to snuggle with our kids, to watch a movie with our kids, more time to not work and to play games with one another, right? In order to look through photo albums, in order to laugh with one another, in order to bake and cook together, right? In order to go online and do a Zoom with grandma and grandpa, right? Certainly there are things that we would be limited in doing, but so many of us have wished for, desired for, prayed for time that we are now being given, that we are perhaps not using for the precious and sacred things we have wanted, because we're so caught up in our fear that we can't even see the opportunity we've been given. This is a message that we can share with others, right? To seize the moment. I love seeing the creativity that's happening, right? The local yoga studios that are doing video yoga, right? Same yoga schedule, it's just everyone's doing it online, right? Entertainers that are doing online little kid breaks, right? I have a good friend who's doing, kids clown yoga for little 10-minute snippets throughout the day in order to give the kids something to do. People who are going online and instead of things that could have been done in person, right? We're not going to do an exercise class in person or a tennis lesson in person. Let's do it online, right? If you've had to cancel an event, tell people, hey, the bonus is we're going to do it online now and we can record it and you can be in your PJs with tea, right? Find a way to promote the glass half full, right? In this situation. But I see so many people who are getting the thing they have been asking for. They've been getting the thing they're trying to manifest or pray for. They're getting that. We are getting time. We are getting a pause from all of the craziness, all of the hubbub, and there is an opportunity for us to embrace this and use it as an opportunity to reflect on our choices. And what are we going to learn during this pause? What new habits are we going to choose that we have an opportunity to select carefully from on the other side of the pandemic to choose how we move forward? And so I believe many of you have an opportunity to promote this to your communities. So yes, we live in a lot of cultures that are about freedom and autonomy and independence, but there's an opportunity to talk today to people in our communities about choosing love for one another in our human family in order to not promote the spread of this virus, especially in a way in the short term that can easily overwhelm our healthcare communities and resources. So I want to talk about a few other things, right? Let's talk about a few practical things. And I am going to talk about some physiology in just a second for those of you who are waiting for that, right? I believe we need to be physically isolating as much as possible. I get it's a chance to eat deep into your pantry and your freezer, right? All the food that's there that we save for a rainy day or maybe a viral day. It's a good opportunity to be willing to be inconvenienced in the name of care and caution for our families and our communities. So we need to be washing hands. I am not a fan of people who are in serious kind of sympathetic, fear-based triage mode. There's a lot of the general public that's buying up all of the personal protective equipment. Individuals in the public who are buying up respirators just in case they need them. I don't agree with that. I am a big believer that we need to protect ourselves in ways that put less of a burden on the available resources to our healthcare system so that we can save personal protective equipment for the individuals who are courageously out there on the front line, helping in primary care, emergency care, and triage, right? If you stay home, you don't need a mask. But to save that equipment for those individuals. I also think that we have start to being present with people around things that they can do to be healthy. And I find this very interesting because I think one of the things that people are looking for, because we have a population, a modern, intelligent, highly connected population that is looking for the quick fix for this virus, right? We're looking for sort of the ibuprofen equivalent of an antiviral, right? What's the thing I can do that 20 minutes later is going to fix this situation? And this is really an auspicious moment for functional, integrative, holistic, naturopathic medicine. Any modality of medicine and healthcare that helps people the causes of disease and how to get inspired and empowered to caring for those as not just a self-empowered or convenient way to make themselves strong, but as a powerful way of maximizing immune function now and into the future. Folks, one of the biggest hurdles that we face is the fact that people in our communities are hearing that things like sleep and hydration and stress relief and healthy food and getting away from social media are important for boosting their immune function. But because none of these things are sexy, none of these things feel novel, they don't feel transformative, there's no lightning bolt that goes off when we talk about the importance of these things, people have a hard time accepting them as being critical aspects of immune strength, of immune system resiliency. We've got to get back to the importance of educating people about the need to get out of sympathetic dominant nervous system mode, right? We need for our immune system to be as strong as possible, right? Being in sympathetic dominant nervous system mode naturally promotes higher levels of cortisol. When you have higher levels of cortisol, you're naturally going to synthesize less melatonin. Even if you sleep, you won't sleep as deeply, and you won't have as much of a healing effect of melatonin. I'm going to talk a lot about melatonin in just a second because we've got to make sure that we collectively are honoring and promoting high melatonin function. This is where we believe there's a dramatic difference in young people who have very high levels of melatonin, especially children under the age of 10. As we increase in age, we make less and less melatonin, even for normal functioning based on our circadian rhythms. And the elderly in particular make way less melatonin. And this whole topic is a good reminder that melatonin is not just a sleep hormone, right? Melatonin is a really powerful antioxidant, but it's also a critical immunoregulatory hormone, right? It actually helps to provide innate immune system regulation so that once there is viral transmission, right? And I was speaking earlier, I'm going to talk more about it in just a second, right? We believe one of the primary routes of viral uptake for this coronavirus is through ACE2 receptors, which are stimulating a downstream immune system, innate immune system response. We're getting, as expected, which is good, right? An inflammasome type of framework that is therefore causing and promoting the cascade of various inflammatory interleukins, right? Cytokines downstream from that. We want this immune system response. It's a good thing, right? But as is so often the case with a rapidly replicating viral issue, especially in bodies that were already had compromised immunoregulation, right? Or autoimmune disease, or already suppressed immunity, or overloaded immune systems, we can end up with such a perfect storm of progressively building inflammatory fire that it gets out of control. And this is where you get a lot of the seemingly conflicting guidance between various sources of authority, right, around what to do, right? There's one set of things that can help to boost the immune system that can be very beneficial. And yes, we should be doing those because that is what is applicable to the vast majority of people. But what we do to boost the immune system versus what might be necessary downstream in order to control and better modulate and keep from aggressively damaging things like lung tissue when the inflammatory fire has gotten very acute, those can be two two different things. Friends, this is not any different than saying that a person can have an autoimmune disease that has part of its etiology, part of its trigger is an infectious dynamic that needs a good, strong, regulated immune system. But then they develop an autoimmune disease that is causing damage, potentially life-threatening damage to a tissue, and we need to use immunosuppressants for a period of time. There is, of course, a seeming discrepancy between why are we using an immunosuppression when there's an infectious driver at play. And this is where the practice of healthcare through the functional medicine lens allows all of us to better look at not what is a right or a wrong remedy, but who is this person in front of us? What is the particular stage that they are wrestling with? What is going to support their body right now with what it most needs to do? So we need to, in the same way that we would not look to the exact same regimen or remedy or recommendation for someone who is looking to prevent infection and prevent future development out of an autoimmune disease that may run in their family. You're going to make very different recommendations than you will if someone has acute multiple sclerosis and is highly debilitated, and we're trying to arrest that inflammatory process before it wreaks so much havoc that the brain can't recover. Right? So this is where we have to get comfortable in the uncertainty of this overall pandemic, but also come back to the wisdom and the logic and the intelligence of looking at disease processes overall through the functional medicine lens and get out from under thinking, vitamin A is either good or bad, right? Immunosuppressants are either good or bad, right? It depends on who we're talking about and at what particular stage are they wrestling. And a person who has acute respiratory dysfunction and is in the hospital on a ventilator with 70% fibrosis of their lungs, unable to breathe on their own because of just unbelievable inflammatory fire, right? And there's a lot of hubbub in the media about cytokine storm, which is really not as prevalent as I have a problem with that language, right? Because it's not accurate. We have definitely issues with acute inflammatory damage, which then starts to cause all sorts of oxidative damage. And this is where people's glutathione function is really critical. And yes, we need strong immune function, but as a first priority, we've got to stop the oxidative, or at least counter the oxidative damage on the tissue. So we've got to get out from under, I think, and start looking more intelligently about the fact that there is a balance. And this is something we're really passionate about here at SAFM. It's getting out from under right or wrong. Evidence-based or not evidence-based, right? There's a lot of wisdom and a lot of different recommendations, but you got to deal with the reality and the bioindividuality and the truth, the situation of the person in front of you, and get out from under exactly one size fits all, right? And so yes, antioxidant depletion becomes a massive issue downstream once we have had some significant inflammatory fire ongoing, right? For people who are having a mild case, right? And remember, the vast majority of these cases are going to be mild because human beings are resilient. And even though it's a novel virus, we will counter it, right? But I just wanted to inject some sanity into this debate of what's good and what's bad. I just want to get logical with everyone around. You can't recommend the same thing for someone who's trying to prevent getting the virus, right? Actually having the virus take up in their own tissue from someone who has acute respiratory distress because of downstream COVID-19 or maybe even plus secondary infection. Those are two different people. And so we've got to get out from under one size fits all. The vast majority of you are working with people who are trying to prevent transmission, who maybe already have the virus, who are trying to minimize their downstream disease and illness now that they have the virus. And we need to be educating people. Go back to something that everybody can relate to, even young people, right? The notion of like Epstein-Barr, right? I mean, the vast majority of the population, right? It estimates between 90 and 95% of the global population has Epstein-Barr by the time they're adults, depending on the study that you look at. And so in that particular case is a great example of the fact that a virus is widespread but there are plenty of young people who are exposed to mono, right, to other various viruses, who respond to it. They may be sick for a few days. They're going to develop antibodies to it. They'll be protected to some degree, maybe completely in the future. Other people have devastating, life-altering experiences with downstream disease. This is not our first experience with having very highly different and bio-individual responses to a virus, right? And I think we can begin to help give people just a little bit of comfort when we can hearken back to things that they can relate to. So we need to make sure people are sleeping. We need to make sure people are secreting ample, abundant levels of melatonin. The most important way to do that is keep our cortisol down, stay out of sympathetic dominant nervous system mode, promote parasympathetic nervous system mode, because that's when the body emphasizes immune function. That's when the body emphasizes growth hormone. That's when the body puts out its highest glutathione action. This is where healing takes place. And so we want to be promoting parasympathetic dominant nervous system mode wherever possible. A lot of people in your practice, I believe, could be benefiting from sustained release melatonin. We need to not just be sleeping. We need to be sleeping deeply. And for many people who are working at home or taking some time off or working at different hours, it is an opportunity to sleep later, right? To go to bed earlier in order to promote sleep. We got to find a way to make sleep a heroic act, to make sleep a sexy thing in the world of healthcare and wellness, because it's very healing. Melatonin helps to regulate the innate immune system, right? So that the downstream reaction to the toll-like receptors that trigger interleukins, cytokines downstream from the inflammasomes are not as acute, right? So that we minimize the overload that can happen in really vulnerable tissue like the lungs. Now, because the lungs are where we have a lot of these ACE2 receptors, right? Other things that we're doing, like being exposed to a lot of air pollution or not breathing very well, or smoking. These are things that impair our ability to counter this disease, because they naturally make immune tissue more responsive in terms of protecting itself. So individuals who smoke, individuals who are exposed to a lot of air pollution, like individuals in China, for example. China population has a lot of smokers. A lot of their urban areas have particularly strong air pollution. This makes individuals have more ACE2 receptors in their lungs. And so they got a lot of more catcher's mitts, right? That can potentially be bringing on board this particular coronavirus. So we need to be attentive to fresh air. It's another good reason to get outside, get away from the media. People who live in maybe highly contaminated environments want to think about maybe improving the quality of their air. But it's important that we focus in particular on supporting our lungs. And this is where there's a real double concern with regard to calming our immune system with deep measured breaths, in particular long exhales. Box breathing, you can Google it, is a very effective thing for triggering the parasympathetic nervous system, right, via the vagus nerve. Again, not a sexy concept, but something that can really help to boost immunity. I want to talk for a moment about drugs. There's a whole bunch of hubbub about nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in the health media right now. And there's a lot of arguments about whether or not people should be taking acetaminophen or ibuprofen. But I want to go back to the very real intelligent choice of avoiding both. We are interested in promoting the body's own highly evolved, highly developed, natural ability to counter infection. And yes, that involves having a fever and doing things to soothe ourselves that don't involve quenching the very immune system we want to help us. So doing things like taking elderberry and simultaneously taking ibuprofen makes no sense whatsoever. Please be available in your communities talking about these kinds of things. You're trying to boost your innate immune system with one thing, but then you're actively suppressing it with another thing. That doesn't make sense. If you have a fever, it's because you need to have a fever. And I want to harken back to good old school remedies in some cases, right? Fevers help to counter infection. It helps to bring the body into an infectious arresting mode. And so we need to be allowed to have fevers. And certainly, yes, they can get out of control, right? But I'm also a big fan of things like my grandmother used to recommend a cool bath, right? Submerging in a cool, not a cold, because we don't want to cause a sympathetic response, but just a cool bath in order to cool the body if the fever gets too high. But otherwise, have a fever. Allow the immune system to work. Use easeful, soothing things in order to distract us, maybe from aches and pains and from fever, but allow the body to fight the infection. So I would argue for neither acetaminophen or ibuprofen. Avoid both. We also need to remember, in addition to suppressing immune function, these drugs also naturally damage mucosal membranes' ability to heal themselves. Well, folks, mucosal membranes is where your immune system is acting, right? It doesn't just do damage to the mucosal lining of the gut. It has an impact on all sorts of mucosal membranes in the entire body and in the mouth, in the lungs. We want those to be functioning, right, to their best ability. So the last thing we want to do is be damaging them. Proton pump inhibitor medications. We know that these can have an impact on nitric oxide, which is another wonderful innate mechanism in the body like melatonin that helps with immunoregulation with regard to the innate immune system. We want to be boosting nitric oxide function. We want to be boosting melatonin. I personally think we still have quite a bit to learn about what particular hypertensive medications may or may not be helpful here. I want to be very cautious about jumping to conclusions early on about saying that a particular drug that's going to affect receptors in the angiotensin-renin system are necessarily going to have the desired effects for changing how this virus responds. There's a lot of fascinating papers out there. I spent a ton of time reading over the past 5 or 6 days in particular, but I just want to make sure that we're not going to jump too quickly on a drug which is going to force a certain behavior in terms of those receptors. I think there's some really interesting early data to look at the notion of blocking those receptors and potentially slowing uptake of the virus, but I think it's early days. And so this is something I believe we need to stay tuned to. And again, do the best we can to stay out of fanning the flames of people looking for the magic pill as a remedy rather than the incredible power of some of these primary interventions. In terms of boosting the immune system, outside of people who have gotten to a downstream COVID-19 space where they are having trouble with a strong acute cough, they do not appear to be countering the infection very well, and they may be having trouble breathing. You know, when they go to take deep breaths, they may be coughing, right? They don't feel comfortable holding their breath because the body forces a cough in order to recover and try to clear those receptors. Outside of where there's evidence of aggressive inflammation, I am a believer of boosting immune function, especially given we know we have a lot of individuals in our communities who are struggling with insufficient levels of nutrients that are needed in order to support immune function. And let's not forget to support things like good thyroid function, which is necessary for having optimal lung function, which is necessary for having optimal immune function. And so I am recommending boosting things like zinc and vitamin A. In particular, vitamin D, if it's insufficient, right? Keeping in mind that we want to make sure that ideally we're repleting magnesium before we start boosting D in order to make sure that the D we're taking is actually able to be activated. But we're in an environment right now in particular where we're likely seeing the skewing of the body's production between 25-hydroxy and 125-hydroxy vitamin D as a result of inflammation, right? I've done a whole webinar on this in the past, and so the body can be modulating this on purpose. But vitamin A in particular, we know a lot of our populations can struggle with conversion of beta carotene to fully formed vitamin A. So what I personally am recommending in this current environment from a preventative viewpoint is about 10,000 IUs of fully formed vitamin A once a day with a meal. Vitamin C with bioflavonoids, right? Between 1,000 and 3,000 milligrams a day. You're definitely going to have to do it to bowel tolerance. And there are people for whom this is contraindicated, right? I can hear it already. So let me just acknowledge some of you out there, right? Where maybe you have issues with high oxalate overload, right? This is not going to appeal to you, but I do believe that vitamin C is important for boosting immune function. And zinc in particular, because when we are in a sympathetic dominant nervous system mode, right, we can end up with the skewing of our zinc copper balance. I'm recommending about 15 milligrams of zinc 3 times a day with meals. Got to be with meals to prevent nausea. And yes, it can be zinc with a little bit of copper, just a little bit of copper, right? More like a ratio of about 15 or 20 to 1. But zinc 3 times a day. I do think there's some wisdom of zinc lozenges, right? In order to really help to get the zinc very present in the mouth, in particular, the mouth and the esophagus. But they need to be divided because the body can only absorb so much at once. And so I am a big fan of these things because they are not omnipresent in our diet. In particular, people who are in sympathetic nervous system mode and fear mode are much less likely to be eating an optimal diet, right? Stress-based eating, anyone, right? People, you've seen what people are buying at the grocery store. People are much more likely to be self-medicating their high levels of stress with junk food and nutrient-poor, hyperpalatable, hypercaloric foods. So we're going to need nutrition. When people are in sympathetic dominant nervous system mode, their nutrient digestion and absorption also are not going to work optimally, right? And so I think we have to be cautious about saying the nutrition that we need to be well armed is somehow going to be exacerbating our vulnerability to it. The reality is that zinc fuels lots and lots and lots of really positive things in the body. Vitamin A fuels lots and lots of positive things, including things that the virus needs to replicate, but also including things that our body needs to fight it. So we have to be cautious about not stepping away. I could make the argument, if that is going to be our rubric, I can make the argument of don't eat it all, because you never could know how a phytonutrient might support a receptor, right? Or support some type of transmission, or support a protein that might assist the virus. The reality is that our best defense is a place of offense. We've got to be strong. Otherwise, we're going to be afraid of doing anything. We're going to be afraid of eating. We're going to be afraid of getting nutrition in order to support our bodies. And this comes, I believe, in part from losing sight of the fact that humans have faced novel viruses over and over and over and over again, right? And so we have to, on some level, lean on our ability to nourish ourselves and to boost our parasympathetic strength and our natural, incisively potent immune function in order to protect us. And then if we get symptoms of an illness, right, in order to be able to support ourselves even more closely. But I really want to put out a message here. There's way too much confusion and infighting. And certainly the most important thing that I can recommend out there for the moment is eating healthy food and resting and moving and staying hydrated and minimizing stress. Absolutely. But given all of the research that's out there, all of the counter arguments, we've got to come back to the fact that an awful lot of people in our practice are wrestling with nutrient deficiencies that are needed as basic foundational immune strength and immune priming activities. Otherwise, we could say people who have an autoimmune disease, well, that's the immune system going overboard, so we shouldn't boost our immune system, right? We should stop taking zinc. We should take vitamin A out of all foods. And we don't do that, right? We know that in our wisdom, we need to be boosting our immune function, right? While trying to respond to the intensity of what the body is wrestling with. And I really believe the most important thing for the more acute cases is really being able to boost our antioxidant function, and in particular glutathione function and countering the oxidative stress from this dynamic. Let me just clarify. There's a question here. I was talking about sustained release melatonin, about vitamin A, vitamin C, and zinc. And yes, vitamin D does need to be sufficient. And if people don't know what their levels are, 2,000 I use it appropriate as a baseline protective dose. But as people are starting to come down with strong targeted symptoms that might indicate that they are developing viral illness, I believe that the vitamin A can easily be boosted to 50,000 IUs a day for a week. The vitamin D can be boosted to 10,000 IUs a day for a week. We talked about vitamin C with bioflavonoids. I think that's important to maximize absorption and orchestrated effect. 1 to 3 grams a day. It's got to beat a bowel tolerance. Got to make sure that people deal with that well. We got to be cautious about oxalates in particular in that environment. And zinc, 15 milligrams, 3 if you become ill, maybe 4 times a day with food. It's got to be in divided doses. I know we're going to have a lot more questions. I know our practitioner forum here at SAFM is alive with all sorts of more esoteric questions. And I have tried to bring today messages that will hopefully resonate with our entire practitioner community and audience. You're serving in all sorts of different avenues. And I want to end where I started, which is with gratitude. Because I want, while everyone is hubbubbing about all of the things that are needed for the population at large to protect themselves and how we should be responding and whether we should do lockdown and whether we should shelter in place and whether people should go to work or not, I want to acknowledge all of you in whatever role around the world that you play in healthcare as being true heroes at this point in time. And your leadership is needed now more than ever. Your self-care is needed now more than ever. Please fill your own cup. Please care for yourself. Please make sure that you are getting rest. If you need melatonin, use it for yourself. If you need an extra break, please take it so that you can give from others as your cup runs over. Because of course, if you come down with strong disease from this virus, our hearts break seeing you fall prey to this. But more importantly, you can't fulfill your calling. You can't do your service and do your work when you suffer. So please take care of yourselves for your benefit, for your family's benefit, for our benefit. Take care of yourself and let your cup flow over and support others. This is an uncertain environment. We've got to get comfortable operating in an environment of uncertainty. We've got to, as we are physically separating from one another, we've got to get hyper connected in a virtual, warm, loving, compassionate, supportive way. Right? Where we give of our own strengths to our particular populations and build up and lift up and support one another. I am deeply privileged and honored to be a part of this community. So thank you so much for joining me. Sending my heart out to you and yours. I know that this too will pass. Every fiber of my being, every cell in my body, I know that this will pass. that we will be stronger, we will be more resilient, more aware, and more awakened as a species on the other side. And our opportunity is to be clear, to be present with what is happening. We don't want to be our head in the sand. We want to be present with what is happening, but we want to be a voice of clarity amongst the chaos. And we want to be leadership and encouraging people to find caution and find the opportunity to be a hero amongst all of the uncertainty and all the fear. Thank you so much. I wish you all well.